But first, all the national security issues to one side. The one thing that makes us more vulnerable than anything else is the state of energy in this country. Energy is essential to our economy because without electricity, gas, and oil, almost nothing will work. Energy is essential to our budget because energy exports help us pay our way in the world. It's essential to workers too because if power's too expensive, industries will just shift offshore and take Australian jobs with them. And it's essential to all of us, to our householders, because in these modern times, flicking a switch to power our phones or light our homes, it's not a discretionary spend. And yet, despite this reality, for too long, business was lockstep with the parties of the left in pretending our renewables-only transition was achievable. Now, for whatever reason, business elites had drunk the Kool-Aid and weren't being honest with us about pie-in-the-sky targets that Labor's got there, happy to soak up all the subsidies, but safe in the knowledge that all will be long gone and in retirement when the proverbial hit the fan. Well, not so anymore. We're now getting leader after leader willing to expose the train wreck that is Chris Bowen's management of our energy grid before it gets past the point of no return. Today it was Graham Bradley, the former head of the Business Council, now head of New South Wales Infrastructure, demanding that the government must extend the life of coal-fired power stations because, he said, if renewable projects don't get started by next year, they are not going to be built. Tanya Constable, the head of the Minerals Council too, saying that the government was clueless on how to integrate the vast amount of renewable energy without the system falling over. And the energy producers head, Samantha McCulloch, who said, we've seen major investments being announced overseas and not in Australia. The clear business consensus that's emerging is that the government's 2030 target to have 82% of our total electricity coming from renewables and to cut our emissions by 43% is both unachievable and extremely damaging. For one thing, it's undermined the only comparative advantage we've ever had in manufacturing, namely cheap and reliable power due to our abundance of high-quality local coal. And today, more bad news on that front, namely the likely closure of one of our last remaining glass manufacturers and too, the only maker of architectural glass in Australia. It's called Oceania Glass, and with it will go the potential loss of some 250 jobs in Melbourne. It's been placed into administration pending a decision on whether the business can survive. But know this, it's one of our 200 largest emitters, and it was captured by the government's so-called safeguard mechanism, which required Oceania Glass to reduce its emissions or to purchase carbon credits. So see what's happened here? It's the decisions of politicians like Chris Bowen that's helped to send them to the wall. With the net result, we'll just end up importing more of our glass from China. No fewer global emissions, just fewer jobs and profit here in Australia. This is just the latest step in the energy insanity-induced deindustrialisation of Australia. Last year, our last big plastics manufacturer, Qenos, announced it was closing plants in Port Botany and Altona because it would be more profitable to use that land for residential housing. Now, like Oceania Glass, Qenos has been plagued by high electricity prices and shortages of gas. At the time of its closure, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, this is known as ASPI, published a sobering assessment of Australia's manufacturing decline. The value added to the Australian economy by manufacturing peaked in 2007 and 8, said ASPI, and it's since dropped by 10%. The latest national accounts at ASPI showed that manufacturing had fallen from 8.3% of GDP in 2007 to just 5.2%, which, according to World Bank figures, now ranks Australia 140th globally, alongside countries like Kiribati and Albania. The ASPI document tracks some of the milestones in our decline, starting with tariff cuts in the 70s and 90s and moving through the closure of the Newcastle Steelworks in 1999. Accelerating, though, recently with climate policy-driven gas shortages and higher power prices. The closure of Qenos, said ASPI, is expected to bring an end to the scale recycling of plastics in Australia, and it will have a significant effect on downstream manufacturers of plastic products. We're talking here about insulation, ducting, synthetic rubber, food packaging, moulded and engineered plastic products. ASPI noted that the recent plant closures meant that we are no longer producing helium in this country, which is a wide range of industrial applications. We can no longer manufacture stainless steel or tin plate. We can no longer make the flat aluminium needed for a whole lot of products, ranging from shipbuilding all the way down to kitchen foil. It's worth noting that in its notorious list of 14 demands put out in 2020, the Chinese embassy included the closing down of ASPI. And in a half surrender to Beijing, the Albanese government has commissioned a report calling for a much stricter government supervision of ASPI's work. And none of the policy-driven gaps that ASPI has identified are likely to be remedied by future Made in Australia subsidies by the Albanese government, because these subsidies are targeted to so-called green sunrise industries, not the emissions-intensive heavy industries that a serious first world economy needs, especially in today's much less secure and more dangerous world. As Peter Dutton tells me in the hour-long special to be broadcast here tomorrow night at 6 p.m.
Industry, manufacturing in this country is done. If we're having smelters and heavy energy user industries relying on intermittent power, it won't work.
And this too.
I predict that there'll be a bipartisan position in relation to nuclear over the course of the next decade, because they're going to be mugged by the reality. The green hydrogen dream is just that. It's not going to work.
Come on, Australia. There is not a lot of time to turn this ship around.